in your house. Maybe we should build a wall to keep the Mexicans out. Or maybe we should send them all to the ghetto for now. I'm not racist. And I never lied, but I think there's a disconnect between your culture and mine. I worship the Einsteins, studied the Steve Jobs, but you ride Tupac's dick like he was a fucking god. Oh my god. And all you care about is rapping and stunting and being ratchet, and that's the nigga within you. Music right in your brain and slowly start to convince you. Then you let your kids listen and then the cycle continues. Blame it all on the menu, blame it on those drinks, blame it on everybody except for your own race. Blame it on white privileges, blame it on white kids, and just blame it on white citizens. Aim at the vice president. Bunch of class clowns. Niggas kneeling on the field, that's a flag down. How dare you try to make demands for this money? You gon' show us some respect, you gon' stand for this country, nigga. I'm not racist. I'm just prepared for this type of war. I heard Eminem's rap at the awards. Who's he fighting for? Y'all can take that motherfucker too. He ain't white no more. It's like you wanna be so famous. You'll do anything for attention and a little payment. I can't take you nowhere without people pointing fingers. Can't take it off your ass. You ain't got no home training. Put your fucking pants up, nigga. Put that suit back on. Take that new rack off. Take that gold out your mouth. Put the pitiful stuff. And then maybe police and stop killing you. Fuck you. What the fuck? I'm not racist.
Nah, we ain't claiming Eminem.
I'm not racist. But there's two sides to this story. I wish that I knew y'all.
We don't want Eminem. And you can have it.
I wish that I knew yours.
Y'all can have Shady.
Not racist.
I did in this for the 10 babies. It's okay, go ahead, Haley. Da.
With all disrespect, I don't really like you white motherfuckers. That's just where I'm at. Screaming all lives matter is a protest to my protest. What kind of shit is that? And that's one war you'll never win. The power in the word is a different saying. We shouldn't say it, but we do, and that's just what it is. But that don't mean that you can say it just because you got nigga friends. That word was originated for you to keep us under. And when we use it, we know that's just how we greet each other. And when you use it, we know there's a double meaning under. And even if I wasn't picking cotton physically, that don't mean I'm not affected by the history. My grandmama was a slave, that shit gets to me, and you ain't got no motherfucking sympathy, you pussy nigga. I'm sorry, you can never feel my life. Trying to have faith, but I never felt alright. It's hard to elevate when this country's ran by whites, judging me by my skin color and my blackness. Trying to find a job, and ain't nobody call me back yet. Man, I gotta sell drugs to put food in my cabinet. Practice ain't slack, this is all a part of your tactics. Talk about no motherfucking tactics. But I ain't making no dough. You think you know everything, but you don't. You wanna copy our slang and everything that we know. Try to steal black culture and make it your own. Whoa. Fuck, I'm exhausted. I can't even drive without the cops trying to start shit. I'm tired of this systematic racism bullshit. All you do is force shit. That's the shit that I'm forced with. And you don't know shit about my people. That's what bothers you. You don't know about no fried chicken or no barbecue. You don't know about the two-step or no loose change. You don't know about no 2 chains or no Kool-Aid. You don't know. And even though Barack was half as black, you hated President Obama. I know that's a fact. You can't wait to get him out and put a cracker back. And then you gave us Donald Trump, and that was payback for that. I'm not racist. I never lied, but I noticed a disconnect between your culture and mine. Yeah, I praised Tupac like he was a fucking god. He was fighting for his life way before he fucking died. Nigga, die, nigga. And all you care about is money and power and being ugly. And that's the cracking within you. Hatred all in your brain and slowly start to convince you. Then you teach it to your children until the cycle continue. Blame it on Puerto Rico, blame it on OJ, blame it on everybody except for your own race. Blame it on black niggas and blame it on black citizens. Aim at the black businesses. I ain't saying I'm innocent, but I might be any day now. Treating everybody how you want in any way how. I swear North Korea about to bomb us any day now. And now I'm ducking every time I hear a fucking plane now. Shit. You know I make a lot of sense, but you just can't admit it. When Eminem went against Trump, that was the illest. Cause even though he's white, he let us know he's standing with us. I'm not racist, but I cry a lot. You don't know what it's like to be in a frying pot. You don't know what it's like to mind your business and get stopped by the cops, and I knew if you about to die or not. You worry about your life, so you take mine. I love you, but I fucking hate you at the same time. I wish we could trade shoes so we could change lives, so we can understand each other more, but that'll take time. I'm not racist. It's like we living in the same building, but split into both sides. I'm not racist. But there's 2 sides to every story, and now you know mine. Can't erase the scars with a bandage. I'm hoping maybe we can come to an understanding. Agree to disagree, we can have an understanding. Not racist.
It's in the spirit of John and Lucas and that awesome ass track. send a video to go along with it. I'm gonna leave Mr. McCain for a second. Let's go back in time real quick. This is like one of the, yo, this book right here, like that, yeah. Try to tell you, if you've already read Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing because he's tough. Like he has some tough opinions. You know what I mean? He's a tough one. I have to. Again, this is Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver with the preface by Ishmael Reed. And it was published. It says a Delta book published by Dell Publishing, a division of Random House, New York, New York. Copyright 1968 and 1991 by Eldridge Cleaver. Copyright preface 1992 by Ishmael Reed. To Beverly, with whom I shared the ultimate of love. It goes on to read, of all the beautiful people who have been so helpful in getting these writings into print, I'd like to thank especially Edward M. Keaton, creator of Rampart magazine, who was the first professional to pay any attention to my writings. Maxwell Geismar, whose criticism has helped me gain a degree of control over my materials. And David Welch for his invaluable assistance as an editor. I'm gonna skip at the preface by Ishmael Reed. As good as it is too, it just, actually not. Let me read the preface. Preface by Ishmael Reed. Though the young African-American hip-hop intellectual pictures Malcolm X as an apostle of armed resistance, their favorite poster is that of a rifle-bearing Malcolm, peering out from behind curtains, preparing to do battle with his enemies. The revolutions that both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. precipitated were textbook Sun Tzu. They produced change, King in the law, Malcolm in consciousness, without throwing a punch at white or firing a shot. And though they were regarded as opposites, it was Malcolm's threats that were particularly responsible for the establishment agreeing to some of King's demands. I told you they were not different. That's why Malcolm left the nation. Like, it was some other personal reasons about Elijah Muhammad's character, especially when it came to his habit of diddling little girls. Like, I'm just saying, man. I'm just saying. Geneva. 2 events, right? It was this one time when the civil war in Sierra Leone as a whole, the war was going on in the provinces, especially in Connaught, McKinney, Bo, all those provinces. It was going on in the provinces way before it hit Freetown, you know what I mean? By the time it hit Freetown, it had already done so much damage to the provinces. And your namesake's father, your namesake probably grew up in Connaught, in Sefadu. And her father, she has a brother from the same mother, and she has a brother and a sister from her stepmother. And one of her brothers, she has a couple of brothers and a sister from her stepmother, Yankari. So, and one of her your aunties and your grandfather and your grandmother probably going to sit there wondering, like, how the hell does Alpha remember that? And they probably thought that I didn't remember. I was like maybe 9 or 10 when this happened. So one of my uncles, called Mamadou, one of your namesake's little brothers, Little shithead ass motherfucker. This dude at that age, mind you now, this was like 1994, 95, if I'm not mistaken. I was still at Alphabet College and getting ready to go to academy soon, I think. But one of your uncles and them during the war in the provinces, he had left. They they, they had run away. They had been displaced as of Freetown, and since we were one of the only family members that could accommodate them, so my father and I put them up. Now I don't know. Now I don't know the exact happenings or the circumstances of what happened or what might have happened. All I know is I seen one of your aunties, my little sister, one of your aunties being talked to by now your auntie mama in Jersey and your namesake and my dad got into the talk and a couple of my other aunties. Yeah, yeah, Marema, I think it was. I can't remember which auntie it was, but yeah, one of our aunties having a conversation with my little sister and my other older sister, and my father got into it. All I know is my father was so red faced. Your grandfather was so mad, so red faced that that uncle did not stay there that night. He was gone that night. Like, and your grandfather was about to whoop the fuck out of it. I say he was about to choke the life out of it. He already, I think he choked it. Like, they almost tussled a little bit. But my moms and everybody else stepped in and just told him, like, you know what? Fuck it, I'll be gone. You know what I mean? And thinking back on that, like for some reason that just crept up in my subconscious in the last 8 years. You know what I mean? And I'm like, yo, that man probably I was trying to touch my little sister or something. You know what I mean? That's probably why that's the only thing I could remember that could have set off your grandfather like that. You know what I mean? Because I know how the kind of man he is. You know what I mean? But and that was one, and the other one was we grew up in Lanham, in Kingswood. I grew up in Kingswood after your father. After I came to America, we grew up in Kingswood, and our house is like it's like a corner house. So, and it was this one night, Saturday night. I think I was probably in the ninth grade. It's probably in the ninth grade. We might have just moved there, either 2001 or 2002. It might have been 2002 because the house was a little empty then. The auntie Molly, hey, you got married already? Oh, no, nah, shit, nah. It was a Saturday night in 2002, if I remember correctly, and I had just gotten out of the shower, I, which was odd because your pops was dirty as hell. I was dirty as hell growing up, I ain't gonna lie. Most of the little boys also. I'm not tripping now, man. Stay away from boys. Listen to what your mama say when it comes regarding boys. I'm just saying. Long story short, though, there's no such thing as long story short with me. I am my father's son. I am your grandfather's son. Long story short, though, I'm coming up the steps at your grandmother's house. Hopefully, at this time, you're, you're in America right now. You know which house I'm talking about. I'm coming up the stairs. I have just probably been called up by your grandfather, who's probably sitting there eating dinner, and instead of him getting his own water, he wasn't gonna do that. He had to call one of us who was probably downstairs come get it out. That's the African way. You gonna go through it. I'm just saying, that's the African way. Ain't no chores, ain't no allowance, ain't no allowance for chores. You gonna do what you do. But I'm coming up the steps and I just hear like tires screeching, like then I hear a voice like screaming like let go of me or some shit like that. Like I said, I was like 3 or 4 years in America, so it was still I was still in my assimilation process, in the first stage of my assimilation process. So a lot of what you hear when Americans speak, when you come to America newly, you don't make out a lot of it immediately because Americans speak so fast and Americans really do not open their mouths or enunciate what they're saying. Americans speak like instead of saying basically they will say basically. You know what I mean? You get it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's an awesome speech cadence. You know what I mean? It's just that as a foreigner coming to America newly, it doesn't really register that quick. It doesn't really register that with their with the instantaneous immediacy for you to make out what's going on. But come to find out, I hear all that going on and I open the door. Like, that's not something you're supposed to do. This is like 9, 10 o'clock at night, almost 10:30, 10:45 at night. This was at nighttime for Saturday night. Like, I quite literally, I opened the door and I seen this lady running towards our door, like, naked. Like, African American sister, like running towards her, like damn near having everything has been ripped off her body, and there's a car screeching up up Nashville, like go to body's business, you know. So, and I see that, I'm shocked. Like I just ran back down real quick and grabbed, cause the couch that this right here, your grandmother, your namesake, will quite literally, she will be shaking her head right now, shaking her head like, yeah, I can't get this boy to not sleep on the couch. Because here's why I like sleeping on the couch, and they all know this. Your father wasn't one to have a house where there's a TV in every room. It was one TV in the house and it was in the living room. Having TVs in multi-room, that was something new that your grandmother did later on in life. One, like maybe in the last 8, 7 years or so, you know what I mean? It was one TV. The TV was in the living room. At that time, wasn't too many people. I would just lay there, had the blanket, you know what I mean? They would have the AC on, it would be cold, so I had the blanket on. So I ran downstairs, grabbed the blanket, and I was laying on real quick. Ran back upstairs. By that time, I guess your grandmother and your grandfather had like heard me open the door and heard what was going on, and it coincided as I'm coming outside and giving her the blanket to like cover herself up. They're coming out, and initially they thought I knew her. I was involved, like I knew who she was, so she came to come see me or some shit, cause my blanket is on her like this. So, but, nah. We eventually ended up calling the police, called the ambulance, came out, checked out, got her, took her. Like, I don't know, I don't remember what the follow-up was from that. I never follow up, I never found out because they didn't tell us anything. She told them that she was hanging with some people, this happened, that happened, and they took her, so they never really told us. I just had to point out this, I don't know what made me say that, but I just like waked and baked without having waken up. So
This is your dog. He needs a walk while you're out with friends today. That's where Black comes in. Black lets you book a dog walker whenever you need.
back to
This is Antonio. He's a great.
back to Miss Cleaver, or back to Ishmael Reed. King in the law, Malcolm in consciousness, without throwing a punch at White or firing a shot. And though they are regarded as opposites, it was Malcolm's threats that were partially responsible for the establishment's agreeing to some of King's demands. Malcolm made Wolf. That's why I said that. Elijah Muhammad and his diddling of little girls. I'm just saying. Yeah, that. So, there wasn't no Me Too movement in the 50s and 60s. There still isn't a Me Too movement right now. There's a Me Too movement in phrasing, in word, but in actual actions and in actual change of the social consciousness, of the social fabric of society. The ripping apart of ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. That ripping apart of of how men perceive women's role in our lives, in society's life period. It's not really there yet. I digress. Malcolm made wolfing and jive into an art form, and though his battles were fought on television, Marshall McLuhan referred to him as the Electronic Man, and his weapons were words. He was a symbol of black manhood. Our shining prince was the way Ossie Davis put it in a eulogy delivered at Malcolm's funeral. Black men were in need of such a prince. Manhood being very much on the minds of black men during the 60s, their frustration was heightened when some black children were blown to bits during church services in Birmingham, Alabama. King Jr.'s macho critics thought that he had, quote, punked out when he used children in one of his non-violent demonstrations. Black nationalist poets, Askia Mohammed Toure, wondered aloud, but who will protest the women's quarters? The desperate cry of men whose women were being poked with cattle prods and beaten to the ground by white thugs in uniform. I wrote a long, noisy, rambunctious poem entitled Fanfare for an Avenging Angel, dictated to Malcolm, and after reading it, he told me charitably that it reminded him of works by Virgil and Dante. That's how we saw Malcolm X. He would make them pay for the humiliations we suffered in a racist country. Young black intellectuals were out for revenge. They were in a Kikuku warrior mode. On the West Coast, a young black prisoner was using the Spanish dungeon of the sort that used to hold slaves as his personal library. Eldridge Cleaver was also impressed by Malcolm X and took Malcolm X's position over that of Elijah Muhammad, whose generation calls white devils because they had come out of the southern racist hell where the whites had known themselves to be capable of the most fiendish acts. As in the case of his hero Malcolm X, Eldridge Cleaver went to school in jail, reading, writing, meditating, and practicing his intellectual style on mentors, who were obviously no match for his probing, hungry intellect. In his book Soul on Ice, he confessed to a former career as a rapist and admitted to a relationship with white women, still the cardinal taboo in the eyes of white and black nationalists. He assured his readers, especially the Eastern left, which had the power to make celebrities of those who supported its issues, that he was a recovering racist, a former black Muslim who read and admired Norman Mailer's The White Negro, the usual bit of noble savage gibberish. But the recurrent theme in the book is that of an eternal struggle between the black supermasculine menial and the white omnipotent administrator, a struggle that continues in various forms to this day. While white males were on the receiving end of a criticism by black writers during the 60s and early 70s, some white male writers and media commentators have since gotten even by bonding with the black feminist movement and criticizing the treatment of black women by black men. In this war, women are regarded as bargaining chips and loot for both sides. The black ones, the Amazonians, the white ones, gullible Barbie dolls. A white guard objected to Cleaver having pictures of a white woman on his cell wall. This guard, like many white men, regarded all white women as their property, while black men feel that black women belong to them. Both groups were upset when the women declared that they owned their own bodies, their souls, and their minds. In Soul of Ice, the women are either Madonnas or whores. In some gushy, heart-wrenching letters, Cleaver professes his love for his lawyer Beverly Axelrod, and her responses printed in the book were equally cloying. Cleaver was first pushed as a celebrity by the New York Old Left and its branches in Northern California and Los Angeles. They had given up on the worker, at the time depicted by Robert Crumb and other underground cartoonists as a bigoted flag-bearing Budweiser God listen to the pit of misery. Bud, it's like, nah, that's Budweiser, not Bud. I'm sorry. I hear Bud, pit of misery, dilly dilly, Trump America. Assalamu alaikum, white supremacy. Cleaver was first pushed as a celebrity by the New York Old Left and its branches in Northern California and Los Angeles. They had given up on the worker, at the time depicted by Robert Crumb and his underground cartoonists as a bigoted flag-waving, Budweiser guzzling, hard, and incipient Reagan Democrat, and in his place substituted the black prisoner as proxy in their fight against capitalism. There was a time in America about 53, 53, 56, 57, before 50 years ago, before 1968, when Democrats were Republicans and Republicans were Democrats. You know what I mean? That happened because after Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act and all that, just like after Obama became president, something that became law that says that, okay, black folks in America for the first time finally, even though it had been like that already, supposedly have equal rights. On paper, that is, you know what I mean? And can vote just like, and that vote can be counted towards electing somebody, you know what I mean, for any position that anyone can be elected for. So the backlash became that since the Republican Party was the party that was against, since the Republican Party was the party that was against all that, the Republican Party was the party that was for that was usually for enslaving, disenfranchisement, all of that, you know what I mean? That used to be the Democratic Party. Democratic Party was the party that wasn't the party of Lincoln, you know what I mean? It was pretty much like the Southern segregationists. People that believe in keeping the races separate and the races segregated. That was the Democratic Party, you know what I mean? And that was the Democratic Party that was in power. Lyndon Baines Johnson was part of that Democratic Party, you know what I mean? But after he did that, all of a sudden, there was this section of that Democratic Party which was the greatest section of that Democratic Party pre-68 that was known as the Dixiecrats, namely because of the Southern Dixie region, Dixiecrats. Like those Dixiecrats in protest left the Democratic Party and joined up with the Republican Party in what became the Republican Party starting in 1968. That's why Nixon is always considered like the father of the modern day Republican Party, because he ran on that Republican banner. He ran on that banner and eventually became president. You know what I mean? But you saw how his presidency ended and what he was about, how everything came out. If you want to get a glimpse into Nixon, Sebastian Mallaby's The Man Who Knew, awesome movie as well. Action. There's a reaction. But I just wanted to point it out because this is saying bigoted, flag-bearing Budweiser guzzling hard hat, and incipient Reagan Democrat. You know what I mean? They were really meant to say present day Reagan Republicans. History is awesome, y'all. History is awesome. It's not linear. It goes in ebbs and flows. Gotta be active participants in it. Gotta know of it about it. And in this place substituted the black prisoner as proxy in their fight against capitalism. In the New York Times Magazine section, in an article that was preceded by a quote of mine that if Thomas Jefferson were around he'd be reading Eldridge Cleaver, all leftist Harvey Swaddles referred to Cleaver as a quintessential American. And he is in the sense that Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, Edison's Reinhardt, Gerald Vision's Bearheart, and the creatures in those African Native American animal tales who use guile, wit, and flattery to accomplish their ends are quintessential Americans. In a classic tale, a snake says to a benefactor, who expresses dismay after being bitten by the creature he had rescued, "You knew I was a snake." I was in Leonard Bernstein's apartment the week before he gave a party for the Black Panthers, a party made notorious by Thomas Wolfe, in whose latest book, The Bonfire of the Vanities, blacks are likened to rats. And Bernstein, pointing to Cleaver's book on the coffee table, asked me had I read it. I hadn't read him at the time, but figured that the New York left was going to make use of Cleaver and the Panthers, for whom he became Minister of Information. I said so proudly. I was hip of the Eastern intelligentsia, which were dabbling in Marxism at the time, and knew of the intelligentsia's contradictions. Leonard Bernstein, who was sympathetic to the Panthers' cause, was having trouble with black musicians like Arthur Davis, who accused the conductor of discriminating against black musicians. After the collapse of the Black Panther Party, Cleaver, like Doug Street in Wendell Harris's extraordinary film Chameleon Street, went through changes. In Soul on Ice he refers to himself as though he were different people. I am very familiar with the Eldridge who came to prison, but that Eldridge no longer exists, and the one I am now is a stranger to me. He went into exile and lived in Cuba, Algeria, and France, where it was rumored that he shared a mistress with the prime minister. Returned to become a fundamentalist minister, campaigned for the Republican senatorial nomination, designed clothes that highlight the penis, and began a church devoted to the male reproductive organs and the preservation of sperm. That's part of the reason I was trying to skip some of this, because this delved into the man's life after this book. So she was a sad fall, to say the least. Recently, he was criticized for poaching curbside recyclables on behalf of his Church of the Great Taker that were intended for the non-profit Berkeley Ecology Center. Once in a while, he appears in the local newspaper in trouble with the law over some petty charge, or for assisting an elderly white woman from being evicted from her house. Sometimes the local media uses him for comic relief. He wrote a second book, Soul on Fire, which in many ways was as absorbing as Soul on Ice, but like Till Elongspiegel, he had walked his tricks too many times. The book was ignored, and his description of his conversation and his conversion to Christianity marked. He said that he joined the fundamentalists because they had brought him from exile, and if the Panthers had brought him home, he would have sided with them. Each group of Cleaver supporters claimed that he had been taken by the head of the Church of Great Taker, but it could be argued that they did quite a bit of betraying themselves. Besides, if they had read Soul on Ice instead of marveling at the fact that a Black Panther could hold such a gifted mind, they would have learned that Cleaver's most persistent intellectual quality is doubt, and doubters are not followers and are distrustful of structures, which is what perhaps inspired Amari Baraka to describe Eldridge Cleaver as a bohemian anarchist, a highfalutin name for the trickster. The first time I heard Barack Obama's name, I thought they were talking about Amiri Baraka coming out to run for president. Roduma Maria. But his supporters used him, but he used them too. And who could blame a black man for using his wits to get out of one of those Nazi-like pits, often guarded by depraved sadists, where their society had cast him to rather die at the age of 22? Today, thousands of young black men like Cleaver languish in the country's prisons, while the inside traders receive life sentences for nearly wrecking the economic system, while the Justice Department spends millions of dollars to trap a black mayor on a misdemeanor charge, while the BCCI money laundering enterprise is perhaps the biggest drug scandal in history, is ignored, and in a society where most of the SLNers won't even come to trial. Had Cleaver remained in prison without the publicity that ultimately led to his release, he'd probably be dead. By the end of the 60s, the left and the right, like lovers, began to trot towards each other so that at the beginning of the 80s, they were in bed together. Cleaver hurt James Baldwin, as did I, who was deemed politically incorrect by the young lions who were so paranoid about his manhood. Baldwin was also considered a sellout. A radical chic was the expression introduced by the late Seymour Grimm to chastise Baldwin for permitting The Fire Next Time to be published in The New Yorker, the epitome of uptown pretensions and snobbery. Baldwin pretended that he didn't care. Baldwin used to tell me that he didn't mind my criticism because, Ishmael, you're a writer, but that Cleaver and Baldwin underestimated each other. Far from being a clown, Cleaver is a writer too, and though Baldwin comes in for some vicious criticisms from Cleaver, it is obvious that Soul on Ice is influenced by Baldwin's flamboyantly eloquent taxidermy style, just as Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk reminds one of Eldridge Cleaver. But Baldwin proved to be more reliable than Norman Mailer, who is championed in this book. Baldwin went to his grave protesting the injustices committed against the undergrounds of the world by forces and institutions more powerful than them, while at the end of the 60s, Norman Mailer was saying that he was tired of Negroes and their rights, and there is only a thin intellectual partition between his recent comments blaming blacks for the drug trade and those of the new policy elites at the New Republic, whose neoconservative about-face can be gauged by the fact that an endorsement from the pre-right-wing New Republic appears on the paperback edition of Soul on Ice. The publisher Martin Perret, who seems to spend all of his waking hours making up fibs about the underclass, formerly had ties with SDS, wouldn't you know? Cleaver supported the New York Review of Books, which during the 60s carried instructions on how to make a Molotov cocktail, now prints long unreadable pieces by Andrew Hacker denouncing affirmative action and seeking to divide Asian Americans from black Americans with ignorant comments about the Mado minority. The New Left, who sought to use the Black Panthers to foment a violent revolution by the late 70s, had joined the Reagan consensus and had begun to wallow in the selfish consumerism. Others became second thoughters, denouncing the Panthers before neoconservative banquets of the sort that get carried on C-SPAN. Sylvia and Hewlett describes the spirit of of post-revolutionary America as that of a therapeutic mentality, which focuses on the self rather than a set of external obligations. Cleaver believed that the younger generation of whites could be wooed away from their omnipotent administrative fathers by African American dance and music. Hip hop! That's what became hip hop. Cleaver believed that the younger generation of whites will be wooed away from their omnipotent administrative fathers by African American dance and music. Whites began to dance better, but that didn't make them more humanistic. Rock and roll made billions for white artists and became the entertainment at white power rallies and accompanied the black hating lyrics of Axl Rose. Even the creator of the Willie Horton campaign, Lee Atwater, received a better review in the New York Times for his rock and roll music than Miles Davis. Rolling Stone, which was the voice of the counterculture during the 60s, went Republican and upscale, and Malcolm X, the symbol of black 60s manhood, had been outed in a new book by Bruce Perry. The groups that are the subjects of so much abuse in Soul on Ice, women and gays. The Cleaver of Soul on Ice considers homosexuality to be a disease, have placed their opposition front and center, and have made villains of the former black male machos who fantasize a revolution while borrowing their strategies. These groups could even be accused of trivializing the opposition of the white and black underclass, because once you propose that all women, including Queen Elizabeth, and all gays, including Malcolm Forbes, are oppressed, then everyone is oppressed, even the omnipotent administrator, white males with PhDs. The new oppressed, whom the media would have us believe are being set upon by the politically correct multiculturalism. And now Hollywood, which poured money into Black Panther coffers, will get its money back with interest, with a slew of films now in the works about the Black Panthers, demonstrating that Cleaver's scientific socialism was no match for the witchcraft of capitalism. One of these films is being scripted by Anna Hamilton Phelan, the writer for Gorillas in the Mist, my favorite film of the Gestapo wing of the LAPD. Capitalism could even transform a group that once advocated its overthrow into box office receipts and t-shirt revenue. Whatever became of Jerry Rubin and Cleaver's wife Kathleen Cleaver, they went to Wall Street. Tom Hayden married Jane Fonda. I always wondered what would have happened if Cleaver and Huey Newton and the Panthers hadn't been used as pawns in a struggle between the white right, who destroyed them, and the white left, who piled an agenda on them that went way beyond their original community concerns, and who viewed them as cannon fodder. They wanted a nigger to pull the trigger, as one Panther put it. Thanks to the Panthers, the downtown Oakland political establishment is black, but that doesn't seem to prohibit the police from continuing to beat the shit out of black people in Oakland. And as elsewhere in the case of this black ceremonial government, the cash is controlled by whites. They also elected a congressman. Huey Newton was shot dead in the gutter and was bitterly denounced, before his body was even cold, by a post-New Left Berkeley alternative newspaper whose editorial lines mirrors the confusion of the left. One week printing a long piece sympathetic to still imprisoned Panther Geronimo Pratt, another week printing an article favorable to University of California anthropologist Vincent Servige, a member of the New Oppressed, who maintains that women and blacks are intellectually deficient because of their small brain size. The arguments that and of Hitler's scientists used to advance against the professor's ancestors. In this political and cultural environment, Cleaver seems a has-been and villain in his book. Lyndon Johnson, promoter of the Great Society, and Barry Goldwater, who challenged the CIA's mining of the Nicaraguan border, in comparison to the sinister crowd in power now, seems like populists from the quaint old days of the American Weimar. But I suspect that history is not finished with Eldridge Cleaver. If he never does another thing in his life, he wrote this book. It's not just a book about the 60s like most books and films written by his former white allies that prove that the authors were white nationalists all along because they omit or give scant attention to the role of blacks who created the political and cultural matrix for that decade. The conclusion of one recent film, Carl Kitchell's Berkeley in the 60s, most of whose narrators are white women, seems to be that the significance of the political and cultural upheaval of the 60s was that it led to the formation of the middle-class feminist movement. The reissue of Eldridge Cleaver's Soul on Ice will challenge the current bleaching of the black influence on the cultural and political climate of the 60s. This book is a classic because it is not merely a book about that decade, regarded as demonic by some and by others as the most thrilling and humanistic of this century. Soul on Ice is the 60s. The smell of protest, anger, tear gas, and the sound of skull-crunching billy clubs, helicopters, and the revolution is present in its pages. The old covers image of the lilies juxtaposed with the young prisoner's rugged page and unkempt hair is apt. Out of the manure that American society can offer, be for black men, the growth and beauty of their genius cannot be repressed, cannot be denied. Mind you, this preface was written at the re-release of this book in 1992. Okay, so I have to say this again. Parental discretion is greatly advised at this portion because Eldridge Cleaver is a harsh man to hear. You know what I mean? I'm just saying. I'm not gonna read through the whole. I should read the introduction though. Now you see why I was trying to avoid reading that preface. I should read the introduction though, because I'm gonna skip most of it. I'm gonna get straight to part of. I think that's to part one. Yeah. I'm just gonna start with initial reactions on the assassination of Malcolm X. Written from Folsom Prison on June the 19th of 1965. Malcolm X was assassinated on February the 21st of 1965. Steve Francis was born on, that's Steve Francis' birthday. Introduction by Maxwell Geismer. This book, written in prison by a young black American or Afro-American, is one of the discoveries of the 1960s. In a literary epoch marked by a prevailing mediocrity of expression, a lack of substantial new talent, a kind of spiritual slough after the great wave of American writing from the 1920s to the 1940s, Eldridge Cleaver is one of the distinctive new literary voices to be heard. It reminds me of the great days of the past. It has echoes of Richard Wright's Native Son, just as its true moral affinity is with one of the few other fine books of our period, the autobiography of Malcolm X. and as it presents in American terms the only comparable approach to the writings of Franz Fanon. In a curious way, Cleaver's book has definite parallels with Fanon's Black Skin White Mask. Yo, that book is so hard to find. That book is so hard to find, yo. That book is so hard to get your hands on. In a curious way, Cleaver's book has definite parallels with Fanon's Black Skin White Mask. In both books, the central problem is of identity, as a black soul has been, quote, colonized, but more subtly perhaps in the United States for some 300 years, but perhaps even more pervasively by an oppressive white society that projects its brief narrow vision of life as eternal truth. Eldridge Cleaver very fittingly opens these letters from prison with a section called On Becoming in 1954 when he was 18 years old. The Supreme Court had just outlawed segregation. He was in Folsom Prison, California on a marijuana charge. He would be sent back to prison again for what he described as a rape on principle. There is a kind of adolescent innocence, the innocence of genius, in these early letters. Just as later there is a savage irony and a profound deadpan humor about the white man's civilization in the 20th century United States. Cleaver is simply one of the best cultural critics now writing, and I include in this statement both the former sociologists and those contemporary fictionists who have mainly abandoned this province of literature for the cultivation of the cult of sensibility. I am aware also of what may be considered excessive praise in this introduction. In this case, I can only beg the reader to stop reading me and start directly with Cleaver. As in Malcolm X's case, here is an quote outside critic who takes pleasure in dissecting the deepest and most cherished notions of our personal and social behavior, and it takes a certain amount of courage and a weird objectivity to read him. You know what? He's right. Let me just jump over straight to Eldridge. I was going to start with Malcolm. Initial reactions on the assassination of Malcolm X. Folsom Prison, June the 19th of 1965. Sunday is movie day at Folsom Prison, and I was sitting in the darkened hall of Mess Hall Number 1, which convicts called Sunday is movie day at Folsom Prison, and I was sitting in the darkened hall of Mess Hall Number 1, which convicts called the Folsom Theater, watching Victor Buono in a movie called The Strangler, when a convict known as Silly Willie came over to where I was sitting and whispered into my ear. Brother Jay sent me in to tell you that it just came over the TV that Malcolm X was shot as he addressed a rally in New York. For moments, the earth seemed to reel in orbit. The skin all over my body tightened up. How bad? I asked. The TV didn't say, answered Silly Willie. The distress was obvious in his voice. We was around back in Pipe Alley checking TV when a special bulletin came on. All they said was Malcolm X was shot and they was rushing him to the hospital. Thanks, I said to Silly Willie. I felt his reassuring hand on my shoulder as he faded away in the darkness. For a moment, I pondered whether to go outside and get more information, but something made me hang back. I remember distinctly thinking that I would know soon enough. On the screen before me, Victor Buono had a woman by the throat and was frantically choking the last gasping twitches of life out of her slumping body. I was thinking that if Malcolm's wounds were not too serious, that if he recovered, the shooting might prove to be a blessing in disguise. It will focus more intensified attention on him and create a windfall of sympathy and support for him throughout America's black ghettos, and so put more power into his hands. The possibility that the wounds may have been fatal, that as I sat there Malcolm was lying already dead, was excluded from my mind. After the movie ended, as I filed outside in the long line of convicts and saw the shocked, wild expression on Bobby J's face, I still could not believe that Malcolm X was dead. We mingled in the crowd of convicts milling around in the yard and were immediately surrounded by a group of black Muslims, all of whom, like myself, were firm supporters of Malcolm X. "He's dead," their faces said, although not one of them spoke a word. As we stood there in silence, two Negro inmates walked by and one of them said to us, "That's a goddamn shame how they killed that man. Of all people, why they kill Malcolm? Why not they kill some of them Uncle Tommy motherfuckers?" I wish I could get my hands on whoever did it, and he walked away, talking and cussing to his buddy. What does one say to his comrades at a time when the leaders fail? All comments seem irrelevant. If the source of death is so-called natural causes or an accident, the reaction is predictable, a feeling of impotence, helplessness before the forces of the universe. But when the cause of death is an assassin's bullet, the overpowering desire is for vengeance. One wants to strike out, to kill, crush, destroy, to deliver a telling counterblow, to inflict upon the enemy a reciprocal equivalent loss. But whom does one strike down at such a time if one happens to be in an anonymous, amorphous crowd of convicts in Folsom Prison, and the leader lies dead thousands of miles away across the continent? "I'm going to my cell," I told the little knot of Muslims. "Allah is the best knower. Everything will be made manifest in time. Give it a little time. Assalamu alaikum." Wa alaikum assalam. The brothers returned the salutations and we shook hands all around. The double handshake, which is very popular among Muslims in California prison. It is so popular that one sometimes grows weary of shaking hands. If a Muslim leaves a group for a minute to go get a drink of water, he is unlikely to shake hands all around before he leaves, and again when he returns. But no one complains, and the convention is respected as a gesture of unity, brotherly love, and solidarity, so meaningful in a situation where Muslims are persecuted and denied recognition and the right to function as a legitimate religion. I head for my cell. I live in number 5 building, which is Folsom Honor Unit. I head for my cell. I live in number 5 building, which is Folsom's Honor Unit, reserved for those who have maintained a clean record for at least 6 months. Advantages: a larger cell, TV every Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday night, less custodial supervision, easier ingress and egress. If while living in the honor unit you get into a beef which results in action against you by the disciplinary committee, one of the certain penalties is that you are immediately kicked out of number 5 building. As I walked along the first tier towards my cell, I ran into Red, who lived near me on the tier. "I guess you heard about Malcolm." "Yeah," I said. "They say he got wasted." Red, who was white, knew from our many discussions that I was extremely partial to Malcolm, and he himself, being thoroughly alienated from the status quo, recognized the assassination for what it was, a negative blow against a positive force. Red's questions were the obvious ones. Who? Why? The questions were advanced tentatively, cautiously, because of the treacherous ground he was on. A red-headed, blue-eyed white man concerned by an event which so many others greeted with smiles and sighs. I went into my cell. Although I had it blared over the radio constantly and read about it in all the newspapers, days passed during which my mind continued to reject the fact of Malcolm's death. I existed in a dazed state, wandering in a trance around Folsom, drifting through the working hours in the prison bakery. And yet I was keen to observe the effect of the assassination on my fellow inmates. From for most of the whites, there was a leer and a hint of a smile in their eyes. They seemed anxious to see a war break out between the followers of Elijah and the followers of Malcolm. There was only a few whites in Folsom with whom I would ever discuss the death of Malcolm or anything else besides baseball or the weather. Many of the Mexican Americans were sympathetic, although some of them made a point, when being observed by whites, of letting drop slight remarks indicating they were glad Malcolm was gone. Among the Negroes, there was a mass mourning for Malcolm X. Nobody talked much for a few days. The only Negroes who were not indignant were a few of the Muslims who remained loyal to Elijah Muhammad. They interpreted Malcolm's assassination as the will of Allah descending upon his head as having gone astray. To them, it was divine chastisement and a warning to those whom Malcolm had tempted. It was not so much Malcolm's death that made them glad, but in their eyes it now seemed possible to heal the schism in the movement and restore the monolithic unity of the nation of Islam, a unity that they look back on with some nostalgia. Many Negro convicts saw Malcolm's assassination as a historic turning point in Black America. Whereas Negroes often talked heatedly about wiping out all the so-called Negro leaders whom, whom they do not happen to like or agree with, this was the first significant case of Negro leader killing that anyone could remember. What struck me is that the Negro convicts welcomed the new era. If a man as valuable to us as Malcolm could go down, then as far as I was concerned, so could any other man, myself included. Coming a week after the alleged expose Coming a week after the alleged expose of the alleged plot to dynamite the Statue of Liberty, Washington Monuments, and the Liberty Bell, a plot supposedly hatched by discontented blacks. When have you ever known black folks to want to blow shit up? We might want to damage shit, rampage shit, but blow shit up with bombs? That's not us. That's a white move. I'm just saying. A plot supposedly hatched by discontented blacks, the assassination of Malcolm X had put new ideas in the wind with implications for the future of black struggle in America. I suppose that, like many of the brothers and sisters in the Nation of Islam movement, I also had clung to the hope that somehow the rift between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad would be mended. As long as Brother Malcolm was alive, many Muslims could maintain this hope, overlooking the increasing bitterness of the rivalry. But death made the split final and sealed it for history. These events caused a profound personal crisis in my life and beliefs, as it did for other Muslims. During the bitter time of his suspension and prior to his break with Elijah Muhammad, we had watched Malcolm X as he sought frantically to reorient himself and establish a new platform. It was like watching a master do a dance with death on a high-strung tightrope. He pirouetted, twirled, turned somersaults in the air, but he landed firmly on his feet and was off and running. We watched it all, seeking a cause to condemn Malcolm X and cast him out of our hearts. We read all the charges and counter-charges. I found Malcolm X blameless. See, if you get where he's going with it, Malcolm X couldn't do no wrong in his eyes. Just like I find Barack Hussein Obama blameless, faultless. Nah. Context. He was the first black man to become president. You cannot miss it. Like my man Doe reminded me. My man Doe asked me an awesome ass question. I told you, he asked me in a way that as soon as I answered, I came up with all this accomplishment. Like, nah, Obama will be remembered for the fact that he was the first black president, and they're making sure that by this little asswipe of a so-called leader.
A superhero in the kitchen with superpowers. With super.
Every man's got the right to decide his own destiny. And in these judgments there is no partiality. So arm in arm. Back to Eldridge here. But death made the split final and sealed it for history. These events caused a profound personal crisis in my life and beliefs, as it did for other Muslims. During the busy time of his suspension and prior to his break with Elijah Muhammad, we had watched Malcolm X as he sought frantically to reorient himself and establish a new platform. It was like watching a master do a dance with death on a high-strung tightrope. He pirouetted, twirled, turned somersaults in the air, but he landed firmly on his feet and was off and running. We watched it all, seeking a cause to condemn Malcolm X and cast him out of our hearts. We read all the charges and countercharges. I found Malcolm X blameless. Alright. This next sentence that I'm getting ready to read, I had highlighted, and I don't know if you can make up my little gibberish. I, I, I wrote next to that Farrakhan, you know what I mean? Cause y'all already know how I feel about my man Farrakhan in the Armani suits, bro. Your one Armani suit, bro, could literally help out about 2 or 3 families that I know, like on this block, who got much love and respect for you too. You know what I mean? But still. So the sentence goes, it had been my experience that the quickest way to become hated by the Muslims was to criticize Elijah Muhammad or disagree with something he wrote or said. That's why I wrote Farrakhan next to it and I put it in brackets. Please, I'm not trying to be hated by nobody. Like, if you can't tell right now, I don't have hate for anything but hate. If you can't tell by now, I'm sorry, I can't help it, but please, no. I'm criticizing, my criticism of Louis Farrakhan is coming from a good place. It's coming from a place that's greater than that man's leadership title. I'm not seeking to be a leader. Like, I'm gonna say it again, I'm gonna repeat it again. I know people who keep trying to tell me, oh, you should be a leader or voice. I'm not trying to be none of that. We are all leaders in our own right. Just go pick up a book and read and go vote in your community every year. I'm just saying, you if you ignore Farrakhan, if you even if you mad at me right now, if you mad at me for what I'm saying, for what I've ever said about Farrakhan or anybody else that you feel like, whether it's Kanye West, whether it's Lil Wayne, whether it's Trump, you know what I mean, I'm sorry, but it's just opinions, you know what I mean. Don't, yeah. But back to Mr. Cleaver though. It had been my experience that the quickest way to become hated by the Muslims was to criticize Elijah Muhammad or to disagree with something he wrote or said. If Elijah wrote, as he had done, that the swine is a poison creature composed of one-third rat, one-third cat, one-third dog, and you attempted to cite scientific fact to challenges, you had sinned against the light. That was all there was told. How much more unlikely was it therefore that Muslims would stand up and denounce Elijah himself, repudiate his authority and his theology, deny his revelation and take sides against him, the messenger of Almighty God Allah. I never dreamed that someday I would be cast in that hapless role. After Malcolm made his pilgrimage to Mecca, completing a triumphant tour of Africa and the Near East, during which he received the high honors of visiting dignitaries, he returned to the United States and set up on building his newly founded Organization of Afro-American Unity. He also established the Muslim Mosque Incorporated to receive the Muslims he thought would be pulled away from Elijah. The Muslim mosque would teach Orthodox Islam under the direction of Sheikh Ahmed Hassoun from the holy city of Mecca. Grand Sheikh Mohammed Sarur Al-Saban, Secretary General of the Muslim World League, had offered the services of Sheikh Ahmed, according to the Los Angeles Herald Dispatch, to quote, help Malcolm X in his efforts to correct the distorted image that the religion of Islam has been given by hate groups in this country. I began defending Malcolm X. At a secret meeting of the Muslims in Folsom, I announced that I was no longer a follower of Elijah Muhammad, that I was throwing my support behind Brother Malcolm. I urged everyone there to think the matter over and make a choice, because it was no longer a possibility to ride two horses at the same time. On the wall of my cell, I had a large framed picture of Elijah Muhammad which I had had for years. I took it down, destroyed it, and in its place put up in the same frame a beautiful picture of Malcolm X kneeling down in the Muhammad Ali Mosque in Cairo, which I clipped from the Saturday Morning Post. At first, the other Muslims in Folsom denounced me. Some I'd known intimately for years stopped speaking to me or even looking at me. When we met, they averted their eyes. To them, the choice was simple. Elijah Muhammad is the handpicked messenger of Allah, the instrument of Allah's will. All who oppose him was aiding Allah's enemies, the white devils. Whom do you choose, God or the devil? Malcolm X, in the eyes of Elijah's followers, had committed the unforgivable heresy when changing his views and abandoning the racist position. He admitted the possibility of brotherhood between blacks and whites. In a letter sent back to the US from the Holy Land, Malcolm X had stated, and this is a quote from Malcolm X. You may be shocked by these words coming from me, but I have always been a man who tries to face facts and to accept the reality of life as new experiences and knowledge unfolding. The experiences of this pilgrimage has taught me much, and every hour in the Holy Land opens my eyes even more. I have eaten from the same plate with people whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. And I felt the sincerity in the words and the deeds of these white Muslims that I felt among the African Muslims of Nigeria, Sudan, and Ghana. Those are Malcolm X's words. Many of us were shocked and outraged by these words from Malcolm X, who had been a major influence upon all of us and the main factor in many of our conversions to the black Muslims. But there were those of us who were glad to be liberated. But there were those of us who were glad to be liberated from the doctrine of hate and racial supremacy. Yo, hate is a baggage, yo. Hate is a baggage like shit. Man, carrying hate around in your heart, that shit is one of those. The onus of teaching racial supremacy and hate, which is the white man's burden, is pretty hard to bear. Asked if he would accept whites as members of his organization of Afro-American Unity, Malcolm X said that he would accept John Brown if he were around today, which certainly is setting the standard high. At the moment I declared myself for Malcolm X, I had some prestige among the Muslims in the prisons of California because of my active role in proselytizing new converts and campaigning for religious freedom for Muslim convicts. We sent a barrage of letters and petitions to the courts, governmental officials, even the United Nations. After the death of Brother Booker T, X, who was shot dead by a San Quentin prison guard, who at the time had been my cellmate and the inmate minister of the Muslims of San Quentin. My leadership of the Muslims of San Quentin had been publicly endorsed by Elijah Muhammad's West Coast representative, Minister John Shabazz of Muhammad's Los Angeles Mosque. This was done because of the explosive conditions in San Quentin at the time. Muslim officials wanted to avert any Muslim-initiated violence, which had become a distinct possibility in the aftermath of Brother Booker's death. I was instructed to impose an iron discipline upon the San Quentin Mosque, which had continued to exist despite the unending efforts of prison authorities to stamp it out. Most of the Muslims who were in prison during those days have since been released. I was one of the few remaining, and I was therefore looked upon by the other Muslims as one who had sacrificed and invested much in the struggle to advance the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. For that reason, my defection to Malcolm X caused a great deal of consternation among the Muslims of Folsom. But slowly, Malcolm was getting his machine together, and it was obvious to me that his influence was growing. Negro inmates who had had reservations about Malcolm while he was under Elijah's authority now embraced him, and it was clear that they accepted Malcolm's leadership. Negroes whom we had tried in vain for years to convert to Elijah's fold now lined up with enthusiasm behind Malcolm. I ran a regular public relations campaign for Malcolm in Folsom. I saw to it that copies of his speeches were made and circulated among Negro inmates. I never missed a chance to speak favorably about Malcolm, to quote him, to explain and justify what he was trying to do. Soon I had the ear of the Muslims, and it was not long before Malcolm had another ardent defender in Folsom. In a very short time, Malcolm became the hero of the vast majority of Negro inmates. Elijah Muhammad was quickly becoming irrelevant, passé. Malcolm X had a special meaning for black convicts. A former prisoner himself, he had risen from the lowest depths to great heights. For this reason, he was a symbol of hope, a model for thousands of black convicts who found themselves trapped in the vicious PPP cycle. Prison, parole, prison. One thing that the judges, policemen, and administrators of prisons never seem never to have understood for which they certainly do not make any allowances, is that Negro convicts basically, rather than see themselves as criminals and perpetrators of misdeeds, look upon themselves as prisoners of war, the victims of a vicious, dog-eat-dog social system that is so heinous as to cancel out their own malefactions. In the jungle, there is no right or wrong. Rather than owing and paying a debt to society, the Negro prisoners feel that they have been abused, that their imprisonment is simply another form of the oppression which they have known all their lives. Negro inmates feel that they have been robbed, that it is society that owes them, that should be paying them a debt. America's penology does not take this into account. Malcolm X did, and black convicts know that the ascension to power of Malcolm X or a man like him will eventually have revolutionized penology in America. Malcolm delivered a merciless and damning indictment of prevailing penology. It is only a matter of time until the question of the prisoner's debt to society versus society's debt to the prisoner is injected forcefully into national and state politics, into the civil and human rights struggle, and into the consciousness of the body politic. It is an explosive issue which goes to the very roots of American system of justice, the structure of criminal law, the prevailing beliefs and attitudes toward the convicted felon. While it is easier to make out a case for black convicts, the same principle applies to white and Mexican American convicts as well. They too are victimized, albeit a little more subtly, by society. Quote, when black convicts start demanding a new dispensation and definition of justice, naturally the white and Mexican American convicts will demand equality of treatment. Malcolm X was a focus for these aspirations. The black Muslim movement was destroyed the moment Elijah cracked the whip over Malcolm's head, because it was not the black Muslim movement itself that was so irresistibly appealing to the true believers. It was the awakening into self-consciousness of 20 million Negroes which was so compelling. Wow. We have went from 20 million in 67. 50 years. Figo tired, so see me face. Like Bob Marley said, you gonna get tired for see me face. It's like, now let me stop. The black Muslim movement was destroyed the moment Elijah cracked the whip over Malcolm's head, because it was not the black Muslim movement itself that was so irresistibly appealing to the true believers. It was the awakening into self-consciousness of 20 million Negroes which was so compelling. Malcolm X articulated their aspirations better than any other man of our time. When he spoke under the banner of Elijah Muhammad, he was irresistible. When he spoke under his own banner, he was still irresistible. If he had become a Quaker, a Catholic, or a Seventh-day Adventist, or a Sammy Davis-style Jew, if he had continued to give voice to the mute ambitions in the black man's soul, his message would still have been triumphant. Because what was great was not Malcolm X, but the truth he uttered. The truth which Malcolm uttered had vanquished the whole passe of so-called Negro leaders and spokesmen who trifle and compromise with the truth in order to curry favors with the white power structure. He was stopped in the only way such a man can be stopped, in the same way that the enemies of the Congolese people had to stop Lumumba, by the same method that exploiters, tyrants, and parasitical oppressors have always caused the legitimate strivings of people for justice, freedom, and equality, by murder, assassination, and mad dog butchery. Alright, I'm about to do that again. The truth which Malcolm uttered had vanquished the whole pastel of so-called Negro leaders and spokesmen who trifle and compromise with the truth in order to curry favor with the white power structure. He was stopped in the only way such men can be stopped, in the same way that the enemies of the Congolese people had to stop Lumumba, by the same methods that exploiters, tyrants, and parasitical oppressors have always caused the legitimate strivings of people for freedom, justice, and equality, by murder, assassination, and mad butchery. I thought about that after I did it last time, so I had to redo it again. And like I said, I did not rehearse this. I did not do this. This is all being done raw and in your face. Not as raw as Eddie Murphy's raw, but raw and in your face. This is my shit right here. We refuse to be what you wanted us to be. We are. It's going to be. People freedom. Babylon system is the fire. Yo, Bob Marley killed that track, yo. That man killed it. I mean, he killed every track he ever did, but still, killed it. What provoked the assassins to murder? Did it bother them that Malcolm was elevating our struggle into the international arena through his campaign to carry it before the United Nations? Well, by murdering him, they only hasten the process, because we certainly are going to take our case before a sympathetic world. Did it bother the assassins that Malcolm denounced the racist, straitjacket demonology of Elijah Muhammad? Well, we certainly do denounce it, and will continue to do so. Did it bother the assassins that Malcolm taught us to defend ourselves? We shall not remain a defenseless prey to the murderer, to the sniper, and the bomber. Insofar as Malcolm spoke the truth will triumph and prevail, and his name shall live. And insofar as those who oppose him lied, to that extent will their names become curses. Because truth crushed to earth shall rise again. That was a good line. Truth crushed to earth shall rise again. So now Malcolm is no more. The bootlickers, Uncle Toms, lackeys, and stooges of the white power structure have done their best to denigrate Malcolm, to root him out of his people's hearts, to tarnish his memory. But their million worded lies fall on deaf ears. As Odyssey Davis so eloquently expressed it in his immortal eulogy of Malcolm, If you knew him, you would know why we must honor him. Malcolm was our manhood, our living, black manhood. This was his meaning to his people, and in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves. However much we may have differed with him, or with each other about him or his value as a man, let his going from us serve only to bring us together now. Consigning these mortal remains to earth, the common mother of all, secure in the knowledge that what we place in the ground is no more now a man but a seed, which after the winter of our discontent will come forth again to meet us. And we will know him then for what he was and is, a prince, our own black shining prince, who did not hesitate to die because he loved us so. That was the end of the usual eulogy by Odyssey Davis. We shall have our manhood, we shall have it, or the earth will be leveled by our attempts to gain it. That that part of Malcolm X was the end of part one. Let me see if I can go back to part one. Yeah. Let me just read the beginnings of part one. Like I said, man, this was a harsh brother. You know what I mean? This brother was harsh. Like he was, yeah. Part 1, Chapter 1 is titled Unbecoming. Folsom Prison, June 25th, 1965. Trying to tell you, yo, that day, I got a little sister who was born that day, and that's the day Michael Jackson passed, June 25th. 1954, when I was 18 years old, is held to be a crucial turning point in the history of the Afro-American, for the USA as a whole. The year segregation was outlawed by the US Supreme Court. It is also a crucial year for me because on June 18, 1954, I began serving a sentence in state prison for possession of marijuana. The Supreme Court decision was only a month old when I entered prison, and I did not believe that I had even the vaguest idea of its importance or historic significance. But later, the acrimonious controversy ignited by the end of the separate but equal doctrine was to have a profound effect on me. This controversy awakened me to my position in America, and I began to form a concept of what it meant to be black in white America. Now, this is a brother at 18 years old writing this letter in prison right now, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of brothers of that age and a little older and more right now going through what you're going through. This man is pretty much saying a law, something that became law while he was going there, he did not realize the significance of it, but it came to affect him later, and you know, like, read and pay attention to what's going on right now. Just every day in your life, everyday life is a blessed day. Yo. The sun coming out right now. That's not promised every day, so when it is out there, like, yeah, take advantage of it, man. Expound your mind while you can. You can smoke a blunt while you're doing it. He was serving time in state prison for possession of marijuana. Laws are changing, you know what I mean? You see me getting my smoke on, but still, like, this wasn't that long ago. Like, 65 wasn't that long ago. Like, yeah, it wasn't that long ago, yo. Come on. Of course, I'd always known that I was black, but I'd never really stopped to take stock of what I was involved in. I met life as an individual and took my chances. Prior to 1954, we lived in an atmosphere of Novocaine. Negroes found it necessary, in order to maintain whatever sanity they could, to remain somewhat aloof and detached from the problem. We accepted indignities and the mechanisms of the apparatus of oppression, without reacting by sitting in or holding mass demonstrations. Nurtured by the fires of the controversy over segregation, I was soon aflame with indignation over my newly discovered social status, and inwardly I turned away from America with horror, disgust, and outrage. In Soledad State Prison, I fell in with a group of young blacks who, like myself, were in vociferous rebellion against what we perceived as a continuation of slavery on a higher plane. We cussed everything American, including baseball and hot dog. If it was today, they wouldn't have said baseball, they would have said football. Thanks, Kaepernick. All the respect we may have had for politicians, preachers, lawyers, governors, presidents, senators, congressmen were utterly destroyed as we watched them temporizing and compromising over right and wrong, over legality and illegality, over constitutionality and unconstitutionality. We knew that in the end that they were clashing over we knew that in the end what they were clashing over was us, what to do with the blacks, and whether or not to start treating us as human beings. I despise all of them. The segregationists were condemned out of hand, without even listening to their lofty, finely woven arguments. The others I despised for wasting time in debates with the segregationists. Why not just crush them, put them in prison? They will defy the law one day. I defied the law and they put me in prison, so why not put all these dirty mothers in prison too? I had gotten caught with a shopping bag full of marijuana, a shopping bag full of love. I was in love with the weed and I did not for 1 minute think that anything was wrong with getting high. I had been getting high for 4 or 5 years and was convinced with the zeal of a crusader that marijuana was superior to lush. Yet the rulers of the land seemed all to be luscious. I could not see how they were more justified in drinking than I was in blowing the gag. I was a grasshopper, and it was natural that I felt myself to be unjustly imprisoned. While all this was going on, our group was espousing atheism. Unsophisticated and not based on any philosophical rationale, our atheism was pragmatic. I had come to believe that there is no God. If there is, men do not know anything about him. Therefore, all religions were phony, which made all preachers and priests in our eyes fakers, including the ones scurrying around the prisons who, curiously, could put in a good word for you with the almighty creator of the universe but could not get anything done for the warden or parole board. They could usher you through the pearly gates after you were dead, but not through the prison gates while you were still alive and kicking. Besides, men of the cloth who work in prison have an ineradicable stigma attached to them in the eyes of convicts because they escort condemned men into the gas chamber. Such men of God are powerful arguments in favor of atheism. Our atheism was a source of enormous pride to me. Later on, I bolstered our arguments by reading Thomas Paine and his devastating critique of Christianity in particular and organized religion in general. Through reading, I was amazed to discover how confused people were. I had thought that out there beyond the horizon of my own ignorance, unanimity existed, that even though I myself did not know what was happening in the universe, other people certainly did. Yet here I was discovering that the whole US was in a chaos of disagreements over segregation integration. In these circumstances, I decided that the only safe thing for me to do was go for myself. It became clear that it was possible for me to take the initiative. Instead of simply reacting, I could act. I could unilaterally, whether anyone agreed with me or not, repudiate all allegiances, morals, values, even while continuing to exist within this society. My mind would be free and no power in the universe could force me to accept something if I did not want to. But I would take my own sweet time. That too was a part of my new freedom. I would accept nothing until it was proved that it was good for me. I became an extreme iconoclast. Any affirmative assertion made by anyone around me became a target for tirades of criticism and denunciation. This little game got good to me and I got good at it. I attack all forms of piety, loyalty, and sentiment. Marriage, love, God, patriotism, the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, law, concepts of right, wrong, good, evil, all forms of ritualized and conventional behavior. As I prance about club in hand, seeking new idols to smash, I encountered really, for the first time in my life with any seriousness, the ogre. Rising up before me in a mist, I discovered with alarm that the ogre possessed a tremendous and dreadful power over me, and I didn't understand this power or why I was at its mercy. I tried to repudiate the ogre, rooted out of my heart as I had done God, constitution, principles, morals, and values, but the ogre had its claws buried in the core of my being and refused to let go. I fought frantically to be free, but the ogre only mocked me and sank its claws deeper into my soul. I knew then that I had found an important key, that if I conquered the ogre and broke its power over me, I would be free. But I also knew that it was a race against time and that if I did not win, I would certainly be broken and destroyed. I, a black man, confronted the ogre, the white woman. In prison, these things withheld from and denied to the prisoner became precisely what he wants most of all. Of course, because we were locked up in our cells before darkness fell, I used to lie awake at night racked by painful cravings to take a leisurely stroll under the stars, or to go to the beach, or to drive a car on the freeway, or to grow a beard, or to make love to a woman. Since I was not married, conjugal visits would not have solved my problems. I therefore denounce the idea of conjugal visit as inherently unfair. Single prisoners needed and deserved action, just as married prisoners did. I advocate establishing a system under civil service whereby salaried women will administer to the needs of those prisoners who maintain a record of good behavior. If a married prisoner preferred his own wife, that would be his right. Since California was not about to inaugurate either conjugal visits or the civil service, one could advocate either with equal enthusiasm or with the same results, nothing. This may appear ridiculous to some people, but it was very real to me and as urgent as the need to breathe, because I was in my bull stage and lack of access to females was absolutely a form of torture. I suffered. My mistress at the time was my arrest. The beautiful and lonely wife of a serviceman stationed My mistress at the time of my arrest, the beautiful and lonely wife of a serviceman stationed overseas, died unexpectedly 3 weeks after I entered prison, and the rigid, dehumanized rules governing correspondence between prisoners and free people prevented me from corresponding with other young ladies I knew. It left me without any contact with females except those in my family. In the process of enduring my confinement, I decided to get myself a pinup girl to paste on this wall of my cell. I would fall in love with her and lavish my attention upon her. She, a symbolic representation of the forbidden tribe of women, would sustain me until I was free. Out of the center of Esquire, I married a voluptuous bride. Our marriage went along swell for a time. No quarrels, no complaints. And then one evening when I came in from school, I was shocked and enraged to find that the guard had entered my cell, ripped my sugar from the wall, torn her into little pieces, and left the pieces floating in the commode. It was like seeing a dead body float in the lake. Giving her a proper burial, I flushed the commode. As the saying goes, I sent her to Long Beach. But I was genuinely beside myself with anger. Almost every cell, excepting those of the homosexuals, had a pinup girl on the wall, and the guards did not bothered them. Why? I asked the guard the next day. Had he singled me out for special treatment? Don't you know we have a rule against pasting up pictures on the walls? He asked me. Later for the rules, I said, you know as well as I do that rule is not enforced. Tell you what, he said, smiling at me. The smile that put me on my guard. I'll compromise with you. Get yourself a colored girl for a pinup, no white woman, and I'll let it stay up. Is that a deal? I was more embarrassed than shocked. He was laughing in my face. I called him 2 or 3 dirty names and walked away. I can still recall his big moon face grinning at me over yellow teeth. The disturbing part about the whole incident was that a terrible feeling of guilt came over me as I realized that I had chosen the picture of a white girl over the available pictures of black girls. I tried to rationalize it away, but I was fascinated by the truth involved. Why hadn't I thought about it in this light before? So I took hold of the question and began to inquire into my feelings. Was it true? Did I really prefer white girls over black? The conclusion was clear and inescapable. I did. I decided to check out my friends on this point, and it was easy to determine from listening to their general conversation that the white woman occupied a peculiar prominence in all of our frames of reference. With what I have learned since then, this all seemed terribly elementary now, but at the time it was a tremendously intriguing adventure of discovery. One afternoon, when a large group of Negroes was on the prison yard shooting the breeze, I grabbed the floor and posed the question: which did they prefer, white women or black? Some said Japanese women were their favorite, others said Chinese, some said European women, others said Mexican women. They all stated a preference, and they generally freely admitted their dislike for a black woman. I don't want nothing black but a Cadillac, said one. If money was black, I wouldn't want none of it, put in another. A short little stud who was a very good lightweight boxer with a little man's complex that made him love to box heavyweights, jumped to his feet. He had a yellowish complexion, and we call him Butterfly. All you niggas are sick, Butterfly spat out. I don't like no stinking white woman. My grandma is a white woman, and I don't even like her. But it just so happened that Butterfly's crime partner was in the crowd, and after Butterfly had his say, his crime partner said, "Oh, sit on down and quit that line, little old chump. What you say? What about that great girl in San Jose who had your nose wide open? Did you like her, or was you just running after her with your tongue hanging out of your head because you hated her?" Partly because he was embarrassed and partly because his crime partner was a heavyweight, Butterfly flew into him, and before we could separate them and disperse so the girl would not know who had been fighting, Butterfly blooded his crime partner's nose. Butterfly got away, but because of the blood, his crime partner got caught. I ate dinner with Butterfly that night and questioned him sharply about his attitude towards white women. And after an initial evasiveness, he admitted that the white woman bugged him too. It's a sickness, he said. All our lives, we've had the white woman dangled before our eyes like a carrot on a stick before a donkey. Look but don't touch. In 1958, after I had gone out on parole and was returned to San Quentin as a parole violator with a new charge, Butterfly was still there. He had become a black Muslim and was chiefly responsible for teaching me the black Muslim philosophy. Upon his release from San Quentin, Butterfly joined the Los Angeles Mosque, advanced rapidly through the ranks, and is now a full-fledged minister in one of Elijah Muhammad's mosques in another city. He successfully completed his parole, got married to a very black girl, and he's doing fine. From our discussion, which began that evening and has never ended yet, we went on to notice how thoroughly, as a matter of course, a black grown-up in America is indoctrinated with the white race's standard of beauty. Not that the whites made a conscious, calculated effort to do this, we thought, but since they constituted the majority, the whites brainwashed the blacks by the very process the whites employed to indoctrinate themselves with their own group standards. It intensified my frustration to know that I was indoctrinated to see the white woman as more beautiful and desirable than my own black woman. It drove me into books seeking light on the subject. In Richard Wright's Native Son, I found bigger Thomas and a keen insight into the problem. My interest in this area persisted undiminished, and then in 1955, an event took place in Mississippi which turned me inside out. Emmett Till, a young Negro down from Chicago on a visit, was murdered allegedly for flirting with a white woman. He had been shot, his head crushed from repeated blows with a blunt instrument, and his badly decomposed body was recovered from the river with a heavy weight on it. I was of course angry over the whole bit, but one day I saw in a magazine a picture of the white woman with whom Emmett Till was said to have flirted. While looking at the picture, I felt that little tension in the center of my chest I experienced when a woman appeals to me. I was disgusted and angry with myself. Here was a woman who had caused the death of a black, possibly because when he looked at her, he also felt the same tensions of lust and desire in his chest. And probably for the same general reasons that I felt them, it was all unacceptable to me. I looked at the picture again and again, and in spite of everything and against my will and hate I felt for the woman and all that she represented, she appealed to me. I flew into a rage at myself, at America, a white woman, and the history that had placed these tensions of lust and desire in my chest. 2 days later, I had a quote nervous breakdown. For several days, I ranted and raved against the white race, against white women in particular, against white America in general. When I came to myself, I was locked in a padded cell with not even the vaguest memory of how I got there. All I could recall was an eternity of pacing back and forth in the cell, preaching to the unhearing walls. I had several sessions with a psychiatrist. His conclusions was that I hated my mother. How he arrived at this conclusion, I will never know, because he knew nothing about my mother, and when he'd ask me questions, I would answer him with absurd lies. What revolted me about him was that he had heard me denouncing the whites, yet each time he interviewed me, he deliberately guided the conversation back to my family life, to my childhood. That in itself was alright, but he deliberately blocked all my attempts to bring out the racial question, and he made it clear that he was not interested in my attitude towards whites. This was a Pandora's box he did not care to open. After I ceased my diatribes against the whites, I was let out of the hospital back into the general inmate population, just as if nothing had happened. I continued to brood over these events and over the dynamics of race relations in America. During this period, I was concentrating my readings in the field of economics. Having previously dabbled in the theories and writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Paine, and Voltaire, I had added a little polish to my iconoclastic stance, without, however, bothering too much to understand their affirmative positions. In economics, because everyone seemed to find it necessary to attack and condemn Karl Marx in their writing, I sought out his books, and although he kept me now with a headache, I found him for my authority. I took him for my authority. I was not prepared to understand him, but I was able to see in him a thoroughgoing critique and condemnation of capitalism. It was like taking medicine for me to find that indeed American capitalism deserved all the hatred and contempt that I feel for it in my heart. This had a positive stabilizing effect upon me, to an extent because I was not about to become stable, and it divided me from my previous preoccupation, morbid broodings on the black man and the white woman. Pursuing my readings into the history of socialism, I read with very little understanding some of the passionate, exhortatory writings of Lenin, and I fell in love with Bakunin and Nachayev's catechisms of the revolutionists, the principles of which, along with some of Machiavelli's advice, I sought to incorporate into my own behavior. I took the catechisms from my Bible and, standing on a one-man platform that had nothing to do with the reconstruction of society, I began consciously incorporating those principles into my daily life, to employ tactics of ruthlessness in my dealings with everyone with whom I came in contact. And I began to look at white America through these new eyes. Somehow, I arrived at the conclusion that, as a matter of principle, it was of paramount importance for me to have an antagonistic, ruthless attitude towards white women. The term outlaw appealed to me, and at the time my parole day was drawing near. I considered myself to be mentally free. I was an outlaw, quote. I had stepped outside of the white man's law, which I repudiated with scorn and self-satisfaction. I became a law upon myself, my own legislature, my own Supreme Court, my own executive. At the moment I walked out of the prison gate, my feeling towards white women in general could be summed up in the following lines. To a white girl: I love you because you're white, not because you're charming or bright. Your whiteness is a silky thread, snaking through my thoughts in red-hot patterns of lust and desire. I hate you because you're white. Your white meat is nightmare food. White is the skin of evil. You're my Moby Dick, white witch, symbol of the rope and hanging tree, of the burning cross, loving you thus and hating you so. My heart is turned into crucified. I became, that was the end of the quote to white girl. I became a rapist. To refine my technique and modus operandi, I started out by practicing on black girls in the ghetto. In the black ghetto, where dark and vicious deeds appear not as aberrations or deviations from the norm, but as parts of the sufficiency of the evil of a day. And when I considered myself smooth enough, I crossed the tracks and sought out white prey. I did this consciously, deliberately, willfully, and methodically. Though looking back, I see that I was in a frantic, wild, and completely abandoned frame of mind. Rape was an insurrectionary act. It delighted me that I was defying and trampling upon the white man's law, upon his system of value, and that I was defiling his woman. And this point, I believe, was the most satisfying to me, because I was very resentful over the historical fact of how the white man has used the black woman. I felt I was getting revenge. From the site of the act of rape, consternation spread outwards in concentric circles. I wanted to send waves of consternation throughout the white race. Recently, I came upon a quotation from one of Leroy Jones's poems, taken from his book The Dead Lecturer. A cult of death need of the simple striking arm upon the street lamp. The cutters from under their rented earth. Come up, black dada nihilismus. Rape the white girls, rape their fathers, cut the mothers' throats. I have lived those lines, and I know that if I had not been apprehended, I would have slit more white throats. There are, of course, many young blacks out there right now who are slitting white throats and raping the white girl. They are not doing this because they read Leroy Jones's poetry, as some of his critics seem to believe. Rather, Leroy is expressing the funky fact of life. After I returned to prison, I took a long look at myself, and for the first time in my life admitted that I was wrong, that I had gone astray. Astray not as much from the white man's law as from being human, civilized, for I could not approve the act of rape. For I could not approve the act of rape. Even though I had some insight into my own motivation, I did not feel justified. I lost my self-respect. My pride as a man dissolved, and my whole fragile moral structure seemed to collapse, completely shattered. That is why I started to write, to save myself. I realized that no one could save me but myself. The prison authorities were both uninterested and unable to help me. I had to seek out the truth and unravel the snarl web of my motivation. I had to find out who I am and what I wanted to be, what type of man I should be, and what I could do to become the best of which I was capable. I understood that what had happened to me had also happened to countless other blacks and it would happen to many, many more. I learned that I had been taking the easy way out, running away from problems. I also learned that it was easier to do evil than it is to do good. And I have been terribly impressed by the youth of America, black and white. I am proud of them because they have reaffirmed my faith in humanity. I have come to feel what must be love for the young people of America, and I want to be part of the good and greatness that they want for all people. From my prison cell, I have watched America slowly coming awake. It is not fully awake yet, but there is a soul in the air, and everywhere I see beauty. I have watched the sittings, the freedom raids, the Mississippi Blood Summers, demonstrations all over the country, the FSM movements, the teachings, and the mounting protests all over Lyndon's strange laws foreign policy. All of this, the thousands of little details, show me it is time to straighten up and fly right. That is why I decided to concentrate on my writings and efforts in this area. We are a very sick country. I perhaps am sicker than most, but I accept that. I am told in the beginning that I am extremist by I told you in the beginning that I am extremist by nature. So it is only right that I should be extremely sick. Yo, that is an awesome fucking sentiment, yo. Yo, that is an awesome fucking sentiment, yo. He said, I have watched the sittings, the freedom raids, the Mississippi Blood Summers, the demonstration